welcome to another episode of Cemetery Strolls. Unfortunately, I'm having to do talk over on this one. For some reason, I had no volume on this at all. I got pictures but no volume, and I had other things happen at another one as well. So this whole weekend away has been a bit of a weird one. Yes, so welcome to Christchurch, Coldharbour in Surrey, in the south of England. Measured against the rich history of the Church of England, Christchurch, Coldharbour is a young church, built and consecrated in 1848. It was established to serve the needs of the expanding population of Coldharbour as the village grew rapidly in the middle of the 19th century. Its architect, Benjamin Ferry, was in the foremost of Victorian architects, and the church is a fine example of mid-19th century Gothic revival architect. Christchurch was built as a simple country church, a role that it has fulfilled well for more than a century and a half, and continues to fulfil as a beacon of prayer at the heart of the village life. It is also associated with a wilder cultural world. Ralph Vaughan Williams, the composer, used to practice on the organ in his youth. His parents were married here in February 1868, whilst Paddy Leigh Hemar, the noted travel writer, was christened in the church in 1915. This is what you would call a village of the famous. I mean, there's other notable members who used to live in the surrounding area as well. Plus, you can tell by the graveyard once we go about. Just outside the main door to the left are the graves of Marian and Kaja Hemar. Marian Hemar was a noted Polish songwriter, poet and entertainer who first found fame in the 1930s. He fled Poland ahead of the German invasion and settled in England, broadcasting to occupied Poland. After the war, he chose not to return to Poland, being out of sympathy with the communist regime, and broadcast Radio Free Poland for many years from his house in Leaf Hill. Kaja Hemar, Marian's wife, was a film actress and a great beauty, perhaps best known today as one of the actresses who held the torch aloft at the start of Columbia studio films. Born Jan Marian Hercules in Lwów, Poland, now Lviv, part of Ukraine, Hemar was a prolific poet, journalist, playwright, comedy writer and songwriter. He worked under a number of names, including Jan Mariansky and Marian Wallenrod. After studying at university and briefly fighting for the pro-Polish forces against the Russians in 1918-1919, Hemar moved to Warsaw and became a key figure in the Polish cabaret scene. He was a director of the Warsaw National Theme Theatre and also wrote hundreds of radio sketches. When Walt Disney's first full-length colour cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, hit Polish cinemas scene before the Second World War, it was Hemar who provided the whole Polish version for the film's dubbing. The voice of Snow White and her songs were provided by Mia Modzelewska, whom Hemar married in 1935. The relationship broke down in 1939 when Maria left Poland for the United States in the entourage of the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Józef Beck. The couple later divorced. When war broke out in 1939, Hemar's anti-fascist views rendered him the target for the Gestapo. He had previously written a sarcastic song depicting Hitler's moustache, which instigated the German ambassador to complain to the Polish government. When the Germans invaded Poland, the Gestapo sought out Hemar in Warsaw. but by this time he had fled to Romania. Hemar eventually reached the Middle East and volunteered as a private in the Polish independent Carpathian Rifle Brigade. His extraordinary pre-war fame produced instant recognition upon meeting his commanding officer, who gave him an order to write an anthem for the brigade. Hemar performed for the Polish troops and even organised a theatre in the besieged city of Tobruk. In 1941-42, Hemar was stationed in Egypt and then came to England, possibly at the request of General Sikorski, the Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Armed Forces. He was put to work producing counter-propaganda to Goebbels' broadcasts and worked with the BBC during the latter years of World War II. After the war ended in 1945 and Poland fell under communist regime, Hemar remained in England, being a staunch supporter of Polish government in exile and a fierce opponent of the communists. His political stance was such that, with many of his countryfolk, he was unable to return to his homeland. In July 1946, Hemar married Carol Ann Kaja Eric in London. Kaja was born in 1910 and was a Hollywood and Broadway starlet. We'll go more about her in a sec. In Poland, Hemar is known as the Bard of Love, the troubadour of London emigration, and became one of the best known figures in the 20th century Polish diaspora. Hemar was awarded the second highest Polish decoration, the Order of Polonia Resistituła, not once but twice, firstly in 1966 when he was awarded the Officer's Cross, and secondly in 1971 with the Higher Commander's Cross. Little is known about Hemar's time in Surrey. Initially, Marian and Kaja lived at first at Kaja's flat in Knightsbridge, London, until they bought a house in Bayswater. Sometime around 1959, the Hemars purchased Fig Tree Cottage, Leaf Hill, Dorking, Surrey. They divided their Bayswater house into flats after they bought the cottage, which took some time to complete, and Hemar apparently told his nephew in Poland that he was in no discouragement having to live in two places at once. The Hemars are listed in the Dorking telephone directory at Fig Tree Cottage from 1959 and November 1966. He wrote to the Times and gave it as his address. Hemar was writing in support of the Polish Library in London, which had been threatened with closure following a debate in the House of Lords spearheaded by Lord Shackleton. Hemar is enthused that the library, situated at 9 Princess Garden, SW7, was the most popular, biggest and best Polish library in the whole free world, containing close to 100,000 volumes of books banned, authors forbidden, truth unattainable in their communist-occupied land. Perhaps conscious of his position as an alien national, Hemar goes on to say that the library has become living proof of Great Britain's generosity and hospitality, friendship and faith kept with former allies. Marian Hemar died on 11th of February 1972 and is buried at Christchurch, Coldharbour, with his wife Kaja, who died on the 14th of July 1982. Tom Balonsky, who appeared in one of Herman's performances in 1967, recalls that they were a devoted couple and adored each other. Kaja didn't speak a word of Polish, but knew she was married to an extraordinarily talented and important artist. Kaja, née Eric, married Marian Hemar in 1946. She was an American actress, singer and dancer of the 1930s. Her statue adored the logo of the Columbian Pictures. Carol Ann Eric is originally from Denmark. Kaja Eric first appeared in Broadway in Showgirl at the Ziegfeld Theatre in New York in July 1929. Then in Simple Simon in 1930, a musical comedy by Guy Bolton. In Smiles in 1931, She reappeared in The Secret Follies in 1931, from July to November 1931 in Showboat, in 1932 in Murder at the Vanities, in 1933 produced by Earl Carroll at the New Amsterdam Theatre. Further down the slopes are the tombs of the Heath family of Kitlands and their relations, the Harrisons and Watmores. Further east are the tombs of Joshua Wedgwood III of Leafield Place, grandson of the great potter of the same name, and members of his family included Margaret Vaughan Williams and his daughter and mother of Ralph Vaughan Williams. We'll come back to this plot in a bit, because when I was filming here I did see the lady which actually helped me through finding a lot of stuff in this wonderful place. I see her going into the church. I thought she was going to close it. In fact she wasn't, she was just returning something. So we will return back to this plot later on. As you enter the nave from the porch and look east, the church is still very much fairy designed. He chose the form of simple late 13th century chapel as the basis of his design. The Gothic style is used economically and well, with the chancel arch and the windows tracery being drawn from the decorated period of English Gothic architecture. When built, the decorative scheme was much richer and darker than it is today. The pews were stained in a rich dark brown. In 1904, the building was overhauled by W.D. Carroll, its interior enriched with the incisions of a fine king post roof, new redos, chancel fitting and pulpit mostly funded by Sir Alexander Hargreaves Brown and his wife of Broom Hall, in memory of St Alexander's mother, Sarah Benedict Brown. The church remained largely unchanged until 2000, when the west end was dramatically improved by the extension of a balcony with a roof underneath it. The west window, which is best viewed from the balcony, is a particularly fine example of the work of the distinguished stained glass company C.E. Kemp and Co. It was erected as a memorial to Raymond Heath, heir to the Kitlands estate, which lay to the south of the village, who was killed in the Battle of Lewes in 1915. To accommodate an enlarged organ, Carew built a chamber into the north side of the chancel, alongside Fairey's vestry, in his own Gothic style. The upper part of the organ case incorporates a delicate Gothic tracery reminiscent of branches of a tree. The organ was restored in 1932, funded by a bequest of Margaret Vaughan Williams, sister of Ralph Vaughan Williams. Now, when I first saw this, I actually thought it was wallpaper. But then I was informed it was in the 1860s, the ladies of the parish painted a Gothic frieze at the dado level, and the outline of which can be discerned and beneath the modern paint. Now, this literally went right around the whole church, but this was the only bit that was actually saved or discovered. The pulpit was designed by W.D. Quaz and made in 1904 by Goddard and Sons at the cost of £75. It was commissioned as part of the 1904 overhaul of the church and replaced an earlier, simpler design by Ferry. The brief to Connor was to produce a design which matched the new choir stalls and reredos. In the event, he came up with a highly unusual, free-flowing arts and craft influenced Gothic style with battered sides that we see today. The church font, which was moved from to its present location in 2000 from its previous position to the left of the door, the influence of Ferry's design for the font is apparent of the hexagon form, the number 6 having particular spiritual significance to the ecologists. Looking up at the roof, the elaborate king post structure was inserted by W.D. Coles as part of the 1904 overhaul of the church. The original roof was much simpler in form, with no cross beams or king posts. The cross beams act as tie beams, overcoming the outward thrust caused by the weight of the roof, while the king posts support the ridge. It seems likely that the insertion of the new structure was required to prevent the downward pressure of the enormous roof being pushed to the sides of the walls of the church outwards, causing the roof to sag. Now this grave here, if I'm correct, is William Bridge. Now he was a gamekeeper of the area of the estate, and he was brutally murdered in the line of duty by 2 poachers who shot him. Arthur Melmoth Walters, born the 26th of January 1865 in Ewell, Epsom and Ewell Borough in Surrey, and he died on the 2nd of May 1941, aged 76, at Holmwood in the Mole Valley district of Surrey, and he's buried at Christchurch in Coldharbour in Dorking, Surrey. He was an England amateur footballer who played as a defender for the old Coldharbourians and the Corinthians in the late 19th century, as well as making 9 appearances for England, 1 as captain. He was the president of the Law Society of England and Wales. His playing career, his clubs, he attended Charterhouse School playing football in 1882 to 1883 before going up to Trinity College, Cambridge University, earning his blue in 4 years running in 1884 to 1887. Went on to playing for the Old Coldharbourians AFC and also played for Leashier FC and Corinthians in 1885 to 1993. Club honours, he won the FA Amateur Cup winners in 1893, 94 and was runners-up in 94-95. Individual honours as Surrey FA Honourable Secretary at Epsom and Ewell. And his England career, he was one of 5 to become the 115th player to appear for England. He played at left back, and his first match was the 23rd of February 1885, England 4, Ireland 0, a British Championship match at Manchester Football Ground, Whalley Range, Manchester. He was aged 20 and 33 days, and his last game was on the 5th of April 1890 versus Scotland in a 1-1 draw, which in fact he was the captain. It's a British Championship match at Hampden Park, Cross Hill, Glasgow. He was aged 25 years and 69 days. His major honours are British Championship 84 to 85, 1885 to 1886, 1886 to 87, 88 to 89, and 89 to 90. And team honours, British Championship shared in 85, 86 and 89, 90. And individual honours, the South, 5 appearances, 1884 to 1990, withdrew in 1888. The gentleman, 3 appearances, January, December 1886, and White, 1 appearance, March 1890. And his brother is Percy Waters, who also played for England. Also buried in the churchyard, who we're just coming up to, is Isabella Fyvie Mayo, better known as the Victorian novelist Edward Garrett. Isabella is little remembered today, but during the last decades of the 19th century, this determined, independent-minded and hard-working woman became widely published poet and author, much of her prose output being published both in the UK and in North America under the pen name of Edward Garrett. She also became a speaker on liberal causes, particularly on the themes of religion, pacifism and animal welfare. Isabel was born in London on the 10th of December 1843 to Scottish parents Margaret Thompson and George Fyvie. She was the youngest of the couple's 8 children, 5 of whom died in childhood, including their 4 sons. Isabella was educated privately, mainly at the girls' school near Covent Garden, which is in London. In 1855 her father died. George had owned a successful bakery, but following his death the business went into decline. The outcome was that the family fell heavily into debt, and while still a girl who had enjoyed a comfortable Victorian middle-class upbringing, Isabella was obliged to seek a living as best she could. But the family's debts were repaid eventually, and in the process Isabella acquired a mass of knowledge, both of fact and different ways of looking at them, of human nature generally. Life's greatest lessons are taught outside of the classroom. Isabella held a series of secretarial positions while publishing poems and stories in evangelistical magazines, including Youth Magazine, The Family Herald, Good Words, The Sunday Magazine, Leisure Hour and Kind Words. In August of 1867, Alex Stratton, editor of The Sunday Magazine, asked Louisa to write a series of vignettes from the perspective of a city merchant about the sick, the lonely and the outcast, and so forth. The series, to be called The Occupation of Retired Life, had already been advertised as forthcoming under the pen name of Edward Garrett, that Isabella would use all the time thenforth. Also uncovered are 38 serialised novels, over 160 stories and more than 360 articles and reviews authorised by Isabella and published in over 70 periodicals. It was traced the development of Isabella's liberal Christian socialism as she began to write critical about radical prejudice in Britain and the United States. In Triple X, Isabella co-founded the Society of the Recognition of Brotherhood of Man, an organisation that campaigned against racial discrimination throughout its publication. During the 1890s, she became involved in radical socialist networks and was a key populariser in Tolstoy's thought in Britain. Isabella died on the 13th of May 1914 in Old Aberdeen. She's also now buried with her husband John Mayo. This is the gentleman that I have come to visit here. It's Major William English Lyndon Travers. We knew him as Bill. I used to deliver milk to the Travers' house when I was about 5-6 years old. I used to help the milkman, and we'd come out this way. And when I discovered he was buried here, I thought I've got to come and see him. He's a lovely man. Personally, when I've met him when I was a child, always polite. So this is a little tribute to him as well. Thank you. Major William English Bill Lyndon Travers, born 3rd of January 1922 in Newcastle upon Tyne in Tyne and Wear in England, and he died on the 29th of March 1994, aged 72, in Dorking, Surrey. Bill Travers was a Special Forces Army officer, an English actor, screenwriter, director and animal rights activist. Apart from delivering milk as a child, one of my main things that reminds me of Bill Travers is Born Free, where he was with his wife, Virginia McKenna, who, might I add, Virginia does still
Elsa?
I don't know. Well, I suppose I do, really. She reminds me of a little girl I knew at school. She was the smallest of us all, and she wasn't very good at games, but she was very bright and brave and good, and I liked her very much. Her name was Elsa.
Fair enough.
Oh, you're wonderful too, darling. After all, you're the one that did it.
Why, sure. They said I couldn't do it. But I did it. They're beginning to look like lions now, aren't they?
Yes. And to behave like them, too. Don't I remember the father was a man-eater?
You don't believe that man-eating is an inherited trait, do you?
I don't think anyone really knows.
I hope you're both ready for lunch, because I am, and hungry enough to eat a hyena.
I've just been on the Born Free website, and I've just seen a tribute from Will Travers, OBE, Bill Travers' son, for his 30th anniversary of the day he passed. And I'm going to read what he wrote, and I hope it's fine with everybody. There were lots of things I knew about my dad, who died on the 29th of March 1994, aged 72. I knew him as incredibly creative thinker, a problem solver. I knew him as a great dad and briefly grandfather. I knew that my mum, Virginia, was the love of his life. I knew that he loved all his children deeply. And I knew him be a man of endless compassion for animals and for people. But there were some things I knew little of. He almost never spoke of his time in the army, firstly as a Gurkha officer in 1939 on the Indians' deeply dangerous northwest frontier, and then as a Chindit, one of the old Wingate men, parachuted many miles behind enemy lines into Burma, Malaysia, to disrupt and harass and make as much trouble as possible alongside the Chinese resistance. His war diaries, such as they are, barely run to a dozen pages, As one of the very first people to arrive in Hiroshima after the bomb, his description were harrowing. His remorse at the, in his own words, forgivable loss of civilian life was unresolved. His acting career had many highlights, working with the such of Sidney Poitier, James Gardner, Sophie Loren, Stuart Granger, Hayley Mills, Clint Eastwood, and for a few nights only Dustin Hoffman on the stage in New York. Born Free in 1966 was a watershed film for him, travelling to Kenya with the family, playing opposite my mother Virginia for nearly 10 months, learning each day from George Adamson about the lions and life. It must have rubbed off onto me too. His subsequent documentaries, he almost stopped acting entirely, sought to break the mould, shattering the prevalent, almost university lecturer style delivering of nature history information, in an effort to gain access to living rooms around the world. The Lions Are Free, which followed the story of 3 lions used in the film Born Free as they returned to wild and free life with the help of his great friend George Adamson, or Christian the Lion with John Rendell, or Acebrook, and Christian the Lion from Harrods Pet Department, who gained his freedom in Kenya's Kora National Reserve, again thanks to George. There followed a string of others: Simon Trevor's Bloody Ivory, narrated by Judy Parfitt and Ian Holm; Oxford Scientific Films' Death Trap, presented by the extraordinary Vince Price; The Sex Life of Flowers, saucily narrated by the great Freddie Jones; and perhaps the most moving of all, The Queen's Garden, narrated by Virginia, and a featuring a short cameo by Her Majesty the late Queen Elizabeth II, which followed natural history of the gardens of Buckingham Palace over a period of 12 months, and which had the great good fortune to help him with on the occasion. But it is his relentless determination to expose the cruelty, suffering, deprivation endured with animals in zoos around the world that became his abiding passion. One could say his obsession for the last 10 years of his life. And as our tiny charity launched in 1984 took flight, he would pace the house like a restless lion, trying to identify what it was that he could be said, what could be shown to the people everywhere, to explain what he knew so clearly, that wild animals do not belong in zoos, should never perform to the crack of a circus trainer's whip, should never leap through hoops of fire at a dolphinarium. He could not see why the brutal, callous, or just plain indifferent explorations of wild animals in captivity are so widely accepted, and almost every day for a decade he would discuss just that, putting some of his ideas into actions and agreeing sometimes that unfortunately the world wasn't ready for his Born Free vision. For the last 2 or more years of his life, he and a couple of his colleagues spent much of their time voluntarily travelling around Europe, staying in small and often not very comfortable accommodation, where he contracted pneumonia, filming mentally disturbed, deranged behaviour of wild animals in numerous zoos. The elephant brutally beating its head with his own trunk, the jaguar relentlessly passing, the giraffe simultaneously trying to lick the very paint off the bars of its enclosure, the behaviour analysed by the great physician Dr. Roger Mugford, demonstrated a range of repetitive stereotypies, displacement activities likely triggered by the futility and mental sterility of their dismal and poorish lives. Dad called it zoocholis, and that expression has entered the lexicon. The day he passed away, he had just returned from Liverpool, appearing on BBC Two with Virginia, speaking passionately about his most recent investigations. I called him early that evening on my way back from London. He said he was tired. That was the last time I spoke to him. His was a complex life. His late teenage and early 20s were consumed by war. His creative genius, for that is what it was well ahead of his time. His frustration with the slow pace of change was plausible. His outrage at the way we treat animals and each other burned. He was an extraordinary man, and he still is. And next door to Bill Travers is his mother-in-law, Lady Anne-Marie Oakley. She was a musician and a composer, and she is Virginia McKenna's mother. John Peter Leashier, 1799 to 1863. He was a partner in Williams, Deacon and Leashier and Co. from 1826 until his death in 1863. John Peter Leashier was born in London on the 14th of August 1799, the youngest son of Pierre César Leashier, 1772 to 1839. The Huguenot banker, who was a partner in the Amsterdam firm Hope and Co., and his wife Dorothy Elizabeth Barwin, daughter of the London banker Sir Francis Barwin. In around 1815, John and his cousin Henry Mature became partners in Hope and Co., which had been reformed in around 1813 by his father and his uncles Saint Pierre and Alexandra Barwin, all of whom were based in London. In December 1825, during a major banking crisis, the London private bank of Williams, Burgess and Williams failed, a day after the collapse of another city bank, Paul, Thornton, Free, Down and Scott, with which it had close connections. A plan emerged for what remained for the two businesses to be taken over and managed jointly by Henry Sykes Thornton of the latter bank and Charles Williams of the former. The plan determined, however, on finding one or more wealthy backers who would be willing to join them in the partnership. The situation was urgent, and in the words of Thornton's sister Marian, 24 hours only remains in which to discover a man with £300,000 and willing to risk it in these troublesome times at a day's notice, with two young men who had nothing to offer but the ruins of their respective houses. With help from the Baring family, an arrangement was agreed the next day. Williams and Thornton would be joined in partnership by John Deacon, a former partner of Baring's, John Melville, Thornton's cousin and later brother-in-law, and John Peter Leashier. On the 2nd of January 1826, the new bank began trading as Williams, Deacon, Leashier and Co. Thornton joined the partnership a little later, after the affairs of his former bank had been settled. Leashier continued as partner in the bank until his death in 1863. At some point before 1831, John Leashier married Mary Louise Dupree, second daughter of the Huguenot James Dupree of Wilmot Park, Buckinghamshire. They had 6 daughters and 3 sons together. The eldest son, Henry Dupree Leashier, 1831 to 1912, went on to become an MP and a journalist, and owner of the periodical Truth, a man described by Queen Victoria as that horrible lion Leashier. The family lived in Broom Hall in Capel near Dorking, Surrey. The Bush London home was in Portland Place, where his elder brother Henry, later 1st Baron of Taunton, also lived. It is recorded that Henry was constantly pestered by persons confusing him with his brother, the banker, who called to ask for his help and patronage with regards to various of evangelical enterprises. It was his habit to reply to them, "You made a mistake, sir. The good Labouche lives at number 16. Labouche was a dedicated supporter of the Hospital for Sick Children in Great Ormond Street, which opened in 1852. He subscribed to the appeal for funds and served as the hospital's first honorary secretary. The hospital banked with his firm, and he lent it money from his own funds when necessary. With the help of reading and an appeal by Charles Dickens, he substantially increased the hospital's resources. By the end of its first decade, the hospital was treating over 500 inpatients a year alongside almost 11,000 outpatients. On his death, the hospital committee and management stated that Labouche was one of the earliest friends of the Institute and always one of the most liberal and benevolent patrons. He was succeeded as treasurer by his partner at the bank, Henry Sykes Fulton. Labouche was appointed Deputy Lieutenant of Surrey in 1857 and in the same year served as High Sheriff of the county. He built and endowed a church at Leaf Hill near his Surrey home, consecrated in 1848. He was a founding committee member of the 1836 of the Home of the Colonial Infant School Society and paid for the building of an infant school at Capel, Surrey, to open in 1851. John Labouche died in London on the 29th of January 1863. all these final resting places here are going to be coming on another video, because obviously I think this one's gone on too long and I don't want it to drag on too much, and there are others as well, so keep an eye out for the another episode of this church. But at the end of this, I'm just going to put a quick short which was I found on the Born Free, celebrating the 40th year this year, so have a look, and I'm going to drop the links in the description as well. Maybe go along, support them, join their YouTube as well. I thank you muchly for joining me on this beautiful travel around this lovely church of Christchurch in Coldharbour in Surrey, in the hills of Leaf Hill. So I do hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment. I always reply back to comments, and don't forget subscription is free. There's nothing to pay. So once again, I thank you muchly. Goodbye.
We're wishing Born Free a very, very happy 40th birthday.
That's 40 years of working for wild animals in need.
Thank you.